Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in the 26th edition of the CVC Insider Series. This week, we have a fabulous session ahead together with Abhijit Ganguly, the Managing Director at Goodyear Ventures. Abhijit has spent the last 10 years with Goodyear in multiple innovation roles, including incubation activities, and today being in charge of structuring their corporate venturing unit. But before we get started, I wanted to quickly set the stage so you all have some context. First of all, my name is Alba, and I'm part of the 500 Startups team. At 500, we are one of the world's most active seed stage investors with over 2,500 direct investments into startups in 75 countries. And within 500, I'm the head of global innovation strategy, where I work closely with corporate investors and innovators to power their own innovation activities, partnerships, and investment into startups. And we started the CVC Insider Series now over a year ago as part of our efforts to help raise the bar in corporate venturing and build stronger and more supportive ecosystem for startups and investors alike. And every 2 weeks, we host this roundtable featuring top corporate venturing practitioners, sharing their unique stories into CVC, specific challenges that they faced, and lessons that they learned along the way as a result. So if you have in mind any speaker that we haven't yet covered, please feel free to nominate them to a series and let us know. And our host, Nicolas Sauvage, will be moderating the discussion. But there's also a Q&A function, so feel free to ask your questions along the way, and we'll do our best to cover them. So now that you have some context, I'm going to pass it over to our host, Nicolas, to take it away. Please enjoy.
Thank you, Elba. We are not yet quite to the level where we are going to have guests that started when they were listening to the CVC Insider. But Abhijit is quite close to that. He started last year to be the head of the Goodyear Ventures. I want to hear all about him and what he's done so far. Abhijit, do you mind taking maybe 5 minutes to introduce yourself and your personal journey into corporate venturing?
Sure, sounds good, Nicolas. Thank you so much for firstly for having me on this session. Super excited to be here and be able to share some of our journey and where it all started and where we are so far and where we're trying to go. It'd be really exciting times for us to be doing this today. So in terms of my own personal journey, by education, I'm an engineer and an MBA. And I spent pretty much all my career in growth initiatives for companies. So supporting revenue generating activities in new markets and new businesses. My Goodyear journey started almost a decade ago today, actually. And I've spent a majority of our time, in fact, all of my time in our R&D groups, managing and supporting and building up some of our corporate incubator and its related activities. It's been really great to be exposed to Goodyear's global business units, understand some of their priorities, and design new initiatives that add value to the corporation in that way. So we had some failures and a few successes, and very proud of the ones that made it through to some of our business units and got scaled up inside those business units. As a part of doing corporate venturing, as a part of doing our corporate incubator, we also regularly interacted with startups and we worked with some of them. We even ended up buying outright a company that fit our strategic needs very closely. All through our incubator activities, as well as some of our own internal reflections on how to accelerate some of the initiatives that we wanted to get to. Creating and setting up a corporate venture fund was always considered as an important initiative. We felt collectively that by doing so, we would accelerate our own understanding of the rapidly changing mobility ecosystem that we are facing today. So in 2020, January, the CVC was actually set up, and it was announced in CES in Las Vegas, one of the last few in-person events that we had before the pandemic shut the world down effectively. And I took over the leadership role of the CVC in March of last year. So it's been unique for us because we have had this CVC for a majority of its lifetime. In fact, almost all of its lifetime has been spent inside the pandemic. So we have found ways to work in those challenging circumstances. But that's kind of roughly a little bit about my journey and how we came to do the corporate venture and how it got started.
Very nice. Thank you, Abhijit. So you mentioned CES. So I remember, and I'm very grateful to Goodyear when you launched to invite me with my friend Sagi to the Blip, So flying over all of CES. So thank you for that. So
yes, and welcome. Yeah, it's an iconic symbol of Goodyear and our brand, and it's one of the coolest thing ever to be inside of Blim. So very, very happy that you got the opportunity.
oh, it was very cool, very cool. It feels like you're on a lounge in the sky. Maybe it's not the same experience as what Jeff Bezos just did, but it's not bad. Very nice. So there's a lot to unpack on what you just said, but maybe very high level. You're looking at investing in mobility space. What's the size of your fund, and how many investments do you think you're going to make with that fund?
Yeah, so it is a mobility-focused fund. The overall fund size is $100 million. We are a follow-on investor, which means that we like to look for a consortium of investors who are like-minded, who are trying to roughly achieve the same things that we are, and appreciate what Goodyear brings uniquely into an investment consortium. And then we participate in the investment round as a follow-on investor. So that's been our philosophy of investment so far. We don't have a hard number of investments we have to do or need to do in a given year, but roughly it translates to about, we have done so far 6 investments. 3 of them are public, 3 of them are not yet public. Hopefully that'll be made public very soon. But most of our focus has been on the electrification trends, which are very much deeply taking root in our industry, or have taken root and are now accelerating. We have also focused on autonomous vehicles, more specifically on the use cases which are coming, we believe, which are coming to fruition and to the market first. So we have made investments in that area. We are also deeply interested in the connected ecosystem. It is a very unique product that we bring into the market with respect to our core product, which is the tires. We don't think of tires on a daily basis, but it is unique because the tire is the only part of the car that touches the road. And when you talk about automated vehicles or autonomous driving profiles, in a tactile way, what the tire senses from the road can make the autonomous driving profiles very much safer and more efficient. So we believe in those dimensions of value add that we have. And those are the things that we bring into some of the investments that we make.
Very nice. I think that completes a very nice introduction of you and Goodyear Ventures. So let me go back on your personal journey. Engineer and MBA, would you say it's a really good combination to move into corporate venturing? Would you recommend it to the audience?
Certainly, I would say there is not one profile that actually becomes more or less successful in CVC. What I think the most important characteristic of a successful CVC is to be able to reach out to entrepreneurs and really try to understand the type of problems that they're trying to solve for. And then ask yourselves the question, can I add value to this startup and to this entrepreneur using my corporate resources? And then if this startup is successful, can this startup actually meaningfully teach me a few things about what I need to learn about the future? And if you're in a good position to understand those 2 questions, you can come from pretty much any background, I believe. Now, with respect to my technical background and my business background, the way it has helped me in this role is, being comfortable in understanding technology, being able to understand what might work in the world has been helpful. But I would say, it certainly is not a prerequisite or a cookie cutter kind of a background that succeeds. I've seen people from a wide variety of diverse backgrounds coming into venturing and be very successful. But it's really about being open to learn about what the entrepreneurs are trying to tell you and what type of problems is it that they're trying to solve. And then in the corporate world, being able to connect that back into the priorities or the future goals of the corporation, I think are the 2 key elements that make you successful in a CVC role. So is an engineering or an MBA required? No. Has it helped me? Absolutely. But there may be other experiences and other paths that people take that are equally, enabling with respect to success in these kind of roles.
I really like the way you frame it, and it nearly is a framing of both ways. You're thinking about how you're going to add value to the entrepreneurs, understanding what they do and how your mothership can really bring value, and what you're going to learn and bring back to the mothership. And here I'm going to touch on the second part of what you described in your journey, which is you nearly spent a decade in Goodyear engaging with many business units. How much of that is actually helping you to get this really nice two-way between Goodyear and the startups you engage with, and some of them you invest in?
Yeah, I think that it's a very important criteria to be able to be good in corporate venturing. It doesn't matter whether you are the person yourself that understands it, or there is somebody in your team that understands it deeply. It really doesn't matter. But what does matter is that as a CVC team, you have a deep understanding of the corporation whose needs whose priorities you're serving. And that comes in a couple different ways. I mean, in Goodyear's case, we have a very wide geographic spread. So in the CVC team, and myself, my own background included, we need to understand what our businesses look like in each of the geographies that they operate in, starting from China to India to Europe to the Middle East, through to Latin America, to North America, etc. There are nuances and differences in how we are organized in each of these regions. So understanding that and then being able to translate that to the startups in terms of which assets you have in what geographies is key. And then also being able to bring those startups uniquely to our business units is also kind of determined by your knowledge and your understanding of it. So whether you're moving into a corporate venturing role from the outside, or you're an insider moving into a corporate venturing role, it is important to have a feel for the overall, what we call the mothership or the parent company for which you are building the CVC function. So it's important, absolutely.
Very good. And how big is your team today?
Today, we just finished hiring our fourth associate who will be starting from August. Yeah. So the way our team is structured is we have investing professionals who take care of the day-to-day workload of investing and closing the deals with entrepreneurs. We recently added and we just hired somebody into this role, a startup liaison person who will be supporting the activities of connecting the startup to our mothership, as well as connecting our mothership to the startup. So if there is a technology project that we want to do with a given startup where we can become their customers, or if there is a joint technology development that we can do with the startup where they can take that product and supercharge their own growth, all of these activities need to be carefully managed and make sure that we are on top of that. So that's a new leg we have added to our team. Of course, investing is a day-to-day of a CVC, and we have to be good at that, and we have people who are doing that. So I'm excited to announce the fourth person in our team. It's a very small team, but it's a very effective team so far, and I'm thrilled to have the people and the backgrounds that they bring into the group.
Let me jump on something I really like, which is you call that one of your person the startup liaison, which is the job title I coined because I felt like this was really about the job of liaising between the startups and the portfolio company. So it makes me really happy you reuse the naming. What do you think was the best background for choosing your startup liaison? How did you go about choosing that person?
Yeah, so I feel that this is, for us in Goodyear, that person was somebody who, I wanted this person to be somebody who's coming in from the business units.
Yeah.
Has credibility on both sides of Goodyear's business units as well as our R&D organization. So we wanted an internal person. So we made this position an internal only position. And we wanted somebody who was seen very favorably and was credible inside our business units, as well as was understood and known and respected inside our R&D. So I'm very fortunate to have found somebody like that. It's a difficult set of shoes to fill in. But yeah, so that the rule is, as I said, I mean, there is just many touch points that our portfolio companies have with Goodyear. And the touch points could be that some startup finds our retail stores very helpful for them to do some services of their robots or cars or what have you, right? Some startups may find that they want to do a technical project with us or use some of our testing facilities to not to duplicate those fixed asset resources, but to use them to their advantage. All of these things require a lot of focus and daily management, and make sure that those things, those linkages are happening in a very productive way. So that was the rationale behind the role. And the person we selected, in our opinion, had to be somebody who was well-known and well-respected, both inside the business units as well as from, inside our technology organizations.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the best practice for any corporate VC that really want to do, like you said, adding value to the startups, but also bring back some learnings. And you talk about touch points and linkages. This is really the mission of your corporate VC, right? Can you describe maybe in 30 seconds or 1 minute, what is your mission as a corporate VC?
Yeah, and that is an interesting, it's been an interesting part of my job to also communicate to our corporation what is the purpose of setting up an investment function like ours. I would say in a very brief manner, the pace of change in the mobility ecosystem in the last decade has been breathtaking. And that change, it's a really big opportunity if you can keep up with that ecosystem and its pace, to learn from it and then adapt your future strategy on the basis of what you're learning. And we felt that we had very strong R&D programs and capabilities and technical programs, and we have a lot of great relationships in the marketplace with respect to the traditional OEMs and the existing and the new up and comers. And we are learning a lot very quickly through all of that activity. But I think the real reason why we set up the corporate venture capital fund was to add an extra dimension to how we learned, and bring in that external perspectives from founders, from entrepreneurs who were pushing the boundaries of learning in the mobility ecosystem, and bring that in a more direct way than was ever possible. So that was the mission of setting up the CVC fund, to accelerate our own understanding and learning of the changes that are happening to the ecosystem that we care about more deeply. So really that's the purpose. And so we choose our investments very carefully in terms of, are they operating in a space that are today or will be in the future very relevant to us? And if the answer is yes, then the second question is obviously how can we create value for them in their own journey? But the mission remains the same: to learn, to explore, and to keep up with, as I say, is the breathtaking pace of change that is happening in the ecosystem in mobility as we look at it today.
Very nice. And I like the way you describe it as an extra dimension. Now, do you have, in the last year, created some proof points that show that you are learning things that you would not have learned otherwise?
Yeah, it's early days yet in our life. It's been a year and a quarter, but yes, there are already things that are happening. For example, we are creating technical projects with startups, which we are very proud of, and we think that it would have taken, it would have been a bit more difficult for us to engage with these startups in such a meaningful way, because when you become an investor, your entire motivation and your perspective changes in that relationship, because you want that startup to win, and you want that startup to also teach you a few things. So I think the level of the depth of connections we build by being investors are at a very different level than it would have been on a supply agreement basis or on a proof of concept basis. Those are valuable by all means, but it's been terrific to see some of the technology work that we have jointly undertaken with many of our startup partners. It is also exciting to see some of the ways in which they have come to us and said, hey, you have that asset, could we use it? And because if we are able to use your assets, we could actually supercharge our growth. And Goodyear's retail stores is an example of a very popular asset that many of our portfolio companies tend to try to leverage as they try to service their cars, their robots, or what have you. So yeah, I mean, there are examples already that are coming through in terms of the work that we're doing with the startups that is telling us that, wow, without being investors, it would have been difficult to establish that depth of a connection with the startup company.
So you're building a level of intimacy with the startups, which then gives you a level of insights you wouldn't have otherwise.
Absolutely. We have had opportunities where we have brought the startup CEOs to speak to our investment committee, and my CEO, my CTO, and my CFO have heard directly from some of these entrepreneurs. And it's absolutely, it's really, really great to bring that fresh air from outside into our world and inform ourselves in terms of what's happening and how fast are things happening. So yeah, the level of intimacy, the depth of the relationship, these things can be done in a CVC in a very meaningfully different way than some of the other elements and some of the other tools. Now, a CVC alone is not going to be sufficient. You're going to have to, my belief is that you're going to have several tools. And each tool works its own purpose. You have a corporate incubator, you'll have to have a strong R&D program, and then you can add on a CVC, and then you'll see the difference it makes. At least in our case, that's how it all evolved. So there are a variety and a mix of things that we do, and clearly the CVC is making it evident that the depth of the relationships can go a level deeper with investments on the table.
Very nice. Actually, I'm going to ask a question which is biased. In the case of TDK, we started with a corporate VC, and now we're doing an internal incubator. In your case, you started with an incubator and then a corporate VC. What do you think of the two paths? If you could choose, which one would you choose?
That's a hard question to answer. I believe it's very situational for each company. If in our case, it became very important that we are able to explore in addition to running our own business on a day-to-day basis. Yes, you have to make sure that the business is running and the mothership is operating. That's important. But while doing that, it was hard for us to dedicate time and attention and resources into some of those more exploratory activities. That's what led us to start the corporate incubator and the corporate innovation program that fed into that incubator. So that was our journey. Now, at that time, it wasn't evident to us that the CVC should be the first thing to do, but it was very evident to us that the incubator should be done because the exploration activities was better done in that kind of a setup. As we started the exploration activities, then we asked ourselves the question as to how to take this a level further. And that's how the CVC conversation came into being. But I can completely see the other way around where you can argue that, look, let's have the CVC set up first. And when we understand the world outside, we will know how to set up the incubator better. And I think that there is an argument to do both. But in our case, it first started with an understanding that we needed to focus time and effort and resources and even metrics and measurement systems separately from our core business and put them in that kind of an incubator setup. At the same time, the incubator was very closely linked to some of our core assets because the Goodyear brand, the Goodyear retail networks, our technology elements, all those things were leveraged by the incubator. So it was not a rogue operation by itself. It was very tightly linked to some of the core assets that Goodyear could bring to bear. But in our journey, that was the first element, and the CVC was added on last year as we speak.
Very nice. I actually agree. I think both paths are very good. In a way, the way I visualize it is if you start with the incubator, and I think you described it that way, the CVC is one layer on top. And if you start with a corporate VC, then the incubator is one way to go deeper and in more depth. I think what would be challenging, and I would probably caution anyone, is try to do both at the same time. That I think would be extremely hard, and it's very different skill set. So maybe you can talk about what do you think are the different skill set needed to do an incubator well versus a CVC? There are many things that are the same skill set, clearly, but some differences. Can you touch on the differences?
Yeah, so I think when we were doing or building up the incubator, some of the core skills that we were looking for is that intellectual curiosity about the future. So we really wanted people to come in and think critically about the future and ask, what type of a business do we see ourselves being in addition to what we are today? And that mindset was critical because that mindset then translates into the second skill, which is all about being really good at experimentation. So once you know what are the elements of the future that you're looking for, and that requires a certain skill, you have to be able to design and conduct rapid strategic experiments that tell you whether you're right about your assumptions or your assumptions are not correct, or they guide you in a different direction. So those are the two top things I think that I valued the most in terms of the people I hired in the incubator, is that intellectual curiosity, that willingness to ask the question of who is it that we could be in the world that we are likely to face. And that's a very, very hard thing to do. And then the second thing is, once they make up their minds in terms of this is the direction that we see ourselves going into, how can they learn quickly by performing strategic experiments in market with real customers, with real vendors, with real technology partners. And so those conducting those experiments, learning from them, pivoting rapidly in and out of different directions, very much like what you read from Eric Ries in his book, The Lean Startup, which was one of our favorite tools in those days. Those are the types of skills that I think are important. Being able to experiment, being able to be intellectually curious. When you are in the CVC, I think it is very true that you need some of those same elements. Of course, then you need a way to understand how to work with and select startups that are a best fit for your priorities. So the investing skill and the investing mindset is something that gets added on to be successful in the CVC context. Some of the core incubator skills are still probably relevant as you think of building up the CVC successfully.
Very nice. And what do you think would be the biggest difference between the two?
Fair enough. I think in the CVC context, pace is important. An incubator should move fast, no questions. But in the CVC context, the operating rhythm of working with startups who are external to you and are not necessarily bound by some of the contexts of a corporation is important to recognize. So speed and execution are going to be doubly faster. If you think you have a very fast incubator that churns out, tests, rejects, adopts quickly, do 10x of that pace to be good at what a CVC should be doing, because you are dealing with startups who are coming in from the outside, and they are not really bound by some of the same things that make us go at a certain pace inside a corporation. So to be able to recognize that and flip a switch and really be fast-paced and set yourselves up so that you're able to execute faster, I think is kind of one key difference that I felt that we needed to adopt.
Pace is really important, and that's a golden nugget for the audience to really listen to, which is you have to be able to move fast. I'll give you the example of last week where one of our portfolio companies on Friday told us we can join their next round convertible notes, but it closed today. So we had less than a week to get everything done, and we managed to get the legal due diligence, the technical due diligence, the approvals all done within 6 days. And that's really what's needed for us, is to be able to move fast when we need to and take our time when we want to. So
yeah, that is a big difference with the corporate incubator, Nicolas, where typically you're not letting grass grow under your feet. You're moving fast, but you're moving at a different pace with respect to managing and operating a CVC and some of its activities, because they are bound by the startup's needs. We don't look internally, we look at what does the startup need. And that's what guides and kind of bounds the timelines and the activities. And therein I've seen the biggest difference in how the two get operated.
Yeah. Now, there's one more difference when it comes to Goodyear Ventures, which is that you started a corporate VC during the pandemic. So can you tell us about what was the challenges, but maybe some of the opportunities for new best practices as a consequence of setting it up during these very special times?
Yeah, it is funny that you mention it. I took on this role on 1st of March of 2020.
Okay.
And on 15th of March of 2020, we had packed everything out of our offices and we were working from home. So I was wondering at that point of time, is this good timing or bad timing? So it was a very interesting time to start a corporate venture capital fund. It was interesting because typically the ways we would have used to get the word out to entrepreneurs that, hey, we are here, Goodyear Ventures is here and it's ready to do business and it's ready to support you. Those ways were close to us. All the traditional avenues of reaching out to entrepreneurs, doing face-to-face meetings were close to us. So we had to adapt in terms of how we got the word out there that, hey, we are here. And so that was an interesting piece. The second interesting piece was actually when doing diligence, it was not possible to do anything face-to-face. I actually have the memories of a meeting where an entrepreneur was trying to display the three-dimensional movement aspects of a robot that he had designed. And it was an interesting discussion, and interesting to try and get that through Zoom. It adds a whole new layer of complexity to the diligence process from a CVC perspective. So it was very interesting. We had to do diligence differently. We had to learn to interact with founders remotely, and so a lot of that stuff was thrown at us. But the funny thing is, we didn't know any different, because that was the environment we had from day one. So we didn't complain. We just learned to adapt to whatever way worked best for us. And to date, we have made 6 investments, and we have found every time we have found a way to get the type of interactions we needed to get for the entrepreneurs to be comfortable with who we were, and vice versa. So it's been a very interesting times, and hopefully now that things are opening up, I'm hoping to get a taste of what it is like to run a CVC in normal times, when people can meet each other, shake each other's hands, hopefully, and have a coffee together. So those things are very, very interesting, and I look forward to it. But yeah, I mean, meeting people was difficult. Assessing hard technologies without being able to go places was difficult. But we had to find a way to get ourselves comfortable and get going, and we did. There are some interesting cases where we were, during my first investment coming into the CVC was Starship, which is also, Nicolas, one of your...
Yeah, it is also my first investment, so...
Indeed. So we share that. So I remember thinking about how do we get to learn about this technology a little bit better. And we are located in Northeast Ohio. And fortuitously, we found that Starship was operating in a campus, which was about a couple of hours from us. So I took a drive down to the campus, and I ordered lunch through their app. And that was the way I got to experience the technology in the field. So that was an example of how we kind of adapted once those stay-at-home restrictions were lifted. We did what we could without flying to many places to learn the entrepreneurs, learn about the technology, experience it in the field. I don't think a lot of VCs, CVCs do this regularly enough, and that's something that we have kind of made a point to do, is to really become customers of the technology, or become users of the technology that we are investing in, to understand it very deeply. We have found that those activities have given us better insights into the offering, and has helped us ask better questions and get a better understanding of where we are. So yeah, we were born during the pandemic, and we have operated all of our times have been operated during the pandemic. It is not impossible to do. It is possible to do. You just have to adapt. And in our case, we are hoping that the reopenings and people coming back and having more face-to-face meetings and having more FaceTime will just add another dimension to our pace and our abilities to execute deals.
Indeed. I think venture capital is a very high-touch business. I nearly feel like, because of your experience of doing it during the pandemic, you're probably stronger out of it. And now you can really expand into this face-to-face interaction that you couldn't do before. But you've got some best practices already about reaching out to them. And that touched on something else I wanted to talk about, which was Goodyear is clearly a global company. How are you thinking about your investment? Are you thinking about globally, or are you really trying to focus first on the US? What's your thinking about this?
Yeah, so we initially started with a focus on the US, especially during the pandemic times, because it was difficult to coordinate things globally. Also, the different locations of Goodyear had different cadences of office reopenings, vaccination progress. We were dealing with a lot of uncertainties. Europe was on one pace, China was at another pace, the US was at another pace. So we didn't really know at what point globalization would make sense of the CVC's focus areas. So we started in 2020 with an explicit focus of making deals here in the US. But I'm happy to say that our 6th and the latest investment that we are just about signing and are just about to close is going to be in China. So China is going to be our first non-US deal that we are going to be doing. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be using China as our first globalization, of the CVC portfolio. So really thrilled about that. We are actively looking at deals in Europe as well. As you know, we have a presence. We have a second research and development facility in Luxembourg in Western Europe, which is a very centrally located place for us to be and allows us access to some of the major mobility markets. So Western Europe would certainly be a core focus for us going forward. So yeah, US was last year, and that was more by design than anything else. But we as a CVC, we recognize the global footprint that we have. We celebrate it all the time. And we really want to make sure that we become relevant to not just Goodyear Americas, but Goodyear globally and across the different business units that we have globally. So that's definitely an ambition. And yeah, so we're looking forward to the reopenings. Hopefully things go on track as the different governments are planning and hoping for. And we will definitely follow suit accordingly.
Very nice. And congratulations on your first investment outside the US. Although you could argue Starship is headquartered in Estonia, so it's
Fair
not
point.
all in the
Fair
US.
point.
Yes. So talk to me about your investment thesis. Clearly, you said you're mobility focused. Clearly, you want to add value to the companies through Goodyear. But what's your investment thesis? What are you going to invest on this bet on the future as you talked about?
Right. So I think, we are not so different from other mobility focused funds in terms of areas we are looking into. For example, obviously electrification is a very big opportunity for us going forward. And that's an area that we are looking into with respect to investment and thesis. But it is the way we are different is what exactly is it that we are investing in within those dimensions. So maybe even TDK has investments in the electrification world. They may differ materially in terms of where we focus. So with respect to Goodyear, there are two key angles to our investment areas with respect to electrification. One is understanding the way our products need to change or to adapt to the electrification trends. And also understand the way our services and solutions need to change to adapt to the trends of electrification. Many people may not realize this, but Goodyear is not just a tire company. We have a substantial presence in retail and services and solutions. And we, in many instances, we serve customers like FedEx, like some of these national carriers, and we service them in addition to supplying the product for them. And those services can be sometimes IoT and data enabled through sensors that go inside the tires or our infrastructure-based sensors that can sense the condition of the product we are offering. So a lot of that stuff has to evolve with the electrification because the basic vehicle and its configurations are changing. So we are very interested in understanding how services, how solutions evolve in the electrification world, how we can support our customers electrify from internal combustion engines. So those aspects of our thesis are a bit unique with what a generalist mobility fund would be doing. So that's how we are focusing on the EV world. On the autonomous world, there is a very clear case for tire companies or companies that are building that touch point of the car with the road to inform the autonomous software stack in terms of what the tire is sensing, what the tire is feeling, connected to different third-party data sources, weather or a road condition, etc., and being able to make that autonomous stack more efficient, more safe, when it's driving. Imagine an autonomous vehicle that is driving on completely worn-out tires, following an autonomous vehicle that's driving on a completely new set of tires on an icy, slippery surface. The braking distances of those two vehicles would be materially different. Yeah. And these are instances where we think we can come in and make a lot of difference as a strategic partner, in addition to being an investor. So that's kind of been our thesis in the AV landscape. We're obviously interested in connectivity because as it relates to the car and its ability to connect to tier one components, the tire is an important enabler of many value propositions when it's actually connected, not just to the car, but also to the chassis control systems that operate the different, that actuates different safety and other aspects of the car, like your electronic stability control systems. So those have been areas of technology that we are looking into deeply and we'll continue to look into. Of course, there are other trends. For instance, mobility is becoming multidimensional. You just don't move in the map in a two-dimensional way, but mobility is moving up and mobility
exactly.
Right? So there are so many dimensions of mobility now, not just moving on the x-axis or on the y-axis on a map. You can go tunnel down in the earth and move that way, or you can go up in a flight in the eVTOLs and move that way. And there are short-haul movements in how much of ground transportation is going to be in the air in the next 15 years is a very important question for us. And we want to learn about that. So we're interested in that, in those dimensions as well. So those are some of the elements and some of the theses around which we are looking. And we're, each area is really designed to help us learn and experiment and gain an understanding of how fast are things happening, how fast are things changing in the mobility ecosystem.
It's very interesting. And one thing you're saying, which makes me think about also learning about business models. And the business model of Goodyear is really based on value per miles. And as you do drive more miles, clearly your product needs to be replaced or you need higher performance. And if you think about autonomous driving, this is a transition back to a business model per miles where you could be renting. So I can see how you're going to need to learn more also on supply chain and business models. Can you talk about, thank you. Can you talk about your investment committee? How did you set it up? What do you think are the best practices you learned from others that you would want the audience to consider?
Yeah, so our investment committee has our C-suite executives, our CTO, our CFO, and our CEO. In addition to that, we have some critical touch points into the business as well with respect to legal and some of the overall R&D leadership that we have that is managing the incubators as well as the CVC. The best practice in putting together an IC is to have people who are able to, of course, support and champion and help the corporate venture capital fund gain toehold in the company in its early days. So it has to be at a very high level. It needs to be at a very high level in the company. So that's an important piece. And secondly, it has to be filled with people who are leaning forward and asking critical questions about the business and its future and what are the key things that we need to learn. So it's important to understand who are the right people that would help the CVC and create the investment committee in that way. And also sometimes you will need support from within the corporation to be able to execute on certain things. So to be able to have that high level visibility and to be able to go to these people and ask for support in certain areas is critical. So that's another additional consideration that you would need. But in my case, I'm very fortunate to have an IC that is oriented towards the future and is allowing and enabling the CVC to make these investments. As an example, the first IC I had was immediately around the quarter where we were reporting results after COVID impacted everything. And it never came into the conversation of that IC. They were always focused on the future. So this ability to decouple from the day-to-day and being able to bring the futuristic mindset into the meeting is the most important thing, I feel, that a CVC investment committee has to bring. It's almost a very different wine that you're tasting, and you need that cheese in the middle, right, to cleanse your palate a little bit. So it's a little bit in that way analogous, that you have to kind of bring the group in with a different mindset, with an approach towards being curious towards the future and focusing on what we can learn from this deal, and for the time being, decoupling from the day-to-days of the existing business, which is important, but in that context is probably less relevant. So yeah, in Goodyear we have a phenomenal IC, and they've operated and supported the CVC vocally, and we have been able to find our feet in some of the most difficult times inside the corporation and do some great work. So I remain very grateful to the committee and the way it has supported the CVC unequivocally.
I think there are a few golden nuggets, but I like the way I describe it is you have a loose connection. You're not tightly connected to the business that you would be impacted when the business is challenged. And you mentioned you have three CTO, CFO, and CEO. So you have three votes. Do you need the majority or do you need all of them to agree to make an investment?
Yeah, so just to clarify, I also have, we have a senior director who manages the corporate innovation and the incubators and the CVC in there, and also our chief legal person in the team, which is very helpful because they're able to give you fast guidance on some of the watchouts and pitfalls. So I wanted to make sure that I acknowledge their roles that they play in that committee. We don't often have a vote. It is usually by consensus. And I have seen that almost every single investment recommendation we have made had been passed unanimously. So, Nicolas, I don't know what a voting process would look like, and but we haven't set it up like that. So suffice it to say, if someone brings up a concern, we examine it from all different angles. So the way we have it is agreement through consensus. But if somebody brings up a concern that, hey, have you looked at that angle or have you investigated that line of thought? We don't usually resort to a voting process. We want to make sure that we address the concern if it's brought up. And if it's something that the CVC missed in its diligence and we then revise and change the decision, we will do so. So that's kind of the culture in which we operate. It works best for us. But in a different setting, a voting process might work better.
I think it works maybe because also you're very clear that you identify startups where you know you can add value, already identified, and you know you want to learn from them. So the strategic value is identified upfront before you even go to your investment committee.
Very true. And also we do, we try to, every meeting we have with them, we try to bring forward our pipeline and give them an idea of what we are diligencing and give them a flavor of what is going to come. So that they are not caught by surprise in a given meeting. So that's an important aspect, to give them the time to reflect and tell us if they agree, disagree, etc. But yes, I think we think through these two questions. How can we add value to the startup and supercharge its growth? And in reverse, what can we learn from the startup that will be materially important for us as we decide about our own future in this space? And we spend a lot of time articulating those two answers. And if we get those right, typically it's unanimously approved. It's when we don't do a good job of getting those aspects put together, we face the questions. So I think that's how we have operated in the IC, and typically we don't use a voting process. We operate through consensus. So far, it's worked well for us.
I think it works because, like you mentioned, I'm guessing you have regular meeting with your IC where you share your pipeline, and you can calibrate what you decide to deep dive depending on the feedback from your IC.
Indeed, yes. So we are able to we give the IC an opportunity to react to the things that we are doing. We don't bring hundreds of companies every day because that's not really practical. But we do tell the IC that here are the areas where we are digging, and they have ample opportunity to give us feedback on. Well, we don't really think that that's important, or why do you think that's an important area to dig in? And then we can clarify that. So there's opportunities for those conversations to happen. We also have, and this is a very big luxury, given the level of people we need to bring together, but we have created this ability to bring the IC together on not only on a regular cadence, but also on cadence where we need to take a quick decision or an emergency decision because something's very time sensitive.
Yeah, when you need to move fast.
When you need to move fast. So I think I've been extremely fortunate to have that group be cognizant of that need, and we try not do that all the time. But when we have asked for it, we have found time on people's agendas, and we have been able to make it work. So it's very, very important to have that level of access and support from your IC so that you can take decisions quickly when you need to.
Very good. So there is one thing you said and one thing you didn't say. One thing you said is that you're a follow investor. What you did not say is anything to do with financial returns. And maybe part of it is because you're a follow investor, so you can rely on financial VCs to drive the decision on financial. But can you talk about the fact that financial returns hasn't come up in anything that we've discussed so far. And how do you think about financial returns in addition or in collaboration with strategic returns?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that we are strategy first. So we think through whether this company is going to be teaching us something in the long term that we care about, and we are going to be supporting this company in the long term with some of our core assets. We also hold this strong belief that if we are doing a good job of picking the startups that satisfy those two dimensions for us, they will be financially successful. And we don't think that strategic success is decoupled necessarily from financial success. We think one drives the other. And so we believe in working with startups who are leaders in their own spaces. And whether it's leadership through the high quality team that they have got, or leadership on the fact that they're on an idea before anyone else has even thought about it, or it's leadership because they have the best technical team in that specific domain, we believe these things all lead to financial success. So although financial success is not an explicit goal for us going out of the gate, we recognize that there will be a strong correlation with startups that are able to be strategically successful for us, and startups that do become financially successful as well for the fund in terms of its returns. So I want to be clear, we do have financial return goals set to our IC, and we are expected to deliver against those goals. So it's not just about the strategy. It is important. It's the first step. But as a second deliverable for us, to our IC, is indeed financial returns. And we have explicitly have those goals in front of, as far as my deliverables are concerned. So certainly those are not decoupled. Now, the only thing that does happen, to your point, Nicolas, is as a follow-on investors, we don't set the terms, but certainly we review the terms. And and we have a point of view on what are good and what are not good terms, and that's why I said it's very important that we spend a lot of time working out who the lead investor is, what their motivations are, and are they doing the right things for the long-term success and health of the startup. If the answer to those questions are yes, then more often than not we find that the legal documents tend to conform to the standards we expect them to conform to, financially speaking.
So let me test that a little bit. If you find this startup that is great on the strategic, every scorecard is green on the strategic side, you don't like the valuation of the company, you think it's overvalued, would you still invest or not invest?
I think, yeah, the first question is this going to be important strategically for us? And if the answer is yes, the second question is that in that context is the CVC going to add value through the investment in the relationship overall? So in that context, the valuation question does take a backseat. But if those answers are yes, then the answer to your question might be yes. I mean, it's always the best to say is that it depends.
It depends, but I like your answer because I think it comes from honesty, but also it's totally aligned with everything you've described in terms of your strategy and investment thesis. So it makes total sense. I want to ask you about reserve. So you have a $100 million fund. Have you kept a fixed amount for reserve for follow-on investments, or it's not quite decided?
I would say we are starting to frame that. We actually just, in my last IC, we secured an approval for our first ever follow-on investment. Obviously the way we decide follow-on investment is the startup is the relationship healthy? Are we on track? Are we on course? Both from the Goodyear side as well as from the startup side. And is the startup delivering or kind of performing as we expected it to? So those are key factors in terms of a follow-on investment. We treat a follow-on investment diligence as a standalone diligence by itself. So we have to hit all the standards that we set for ourselves in a given deal to decide to follow on. But we don't have something that is set up formally allocated as follow-on dollars. So what we have so far is a setup where we say that we will not say no to a follow-on opportunity. A follow-on opportunity has to meet the same high standards we have in selecting startups that we invest in. And if it does, then we will consider that as an opportunity. And I'm really super pleased to say that we had our first IC convene on a follow-on opportunity, and the verdict was yes, we're going to do this. And so really excited for that. But
congratulations. Actually, this is a real proof point.
yeah, it is. And in the future, we may need to do more formal allocations and stuff, but we are just not at that level of maturity yet. Hopefully, when we get there, that'll be that conversation, I'm sure.
Very nice. Maybe one question is, startups do pivot. Let's assume that you invested in a company and they pivot into something which is no longer strategic for you, but financially they are a rocket. They are really doing well, and maybe thanks to the pivot. Would you not follow on because of no longer strategic alignment, or would you follow because actually the financial makes sense?
If the financials make sense, I would still recommend, I would still go to my IC and defend a follow on, because as I said, the financial return goals that I have on my performance targets are not fictitious. They're not made up, they're real. So of course, if we have a pre-existing relationship with a startup and they pivoted and they're a little bit too much far away from where our strategies and our interests lie, but we see them to be a continuing success, financially speaking, we wouldn't just turn off that as an opportunity for our IC to review and approve, because the financial goals are still relevant. And even when a startup is pivoting and it's going to do something different, in that specific aspect, there is also a lot of lessons to be learned for our internal initiatives. So I think a pivot is not necessarily a bad thing, even if it happens away from your strategy. It can be very instructive for our own incubators in terms of how to actually pivot and make something very different work from something that you started with originally. So it can be an inspiration sometimes. So, I wouldn't completely discount it, even if it is a little bit further away from our strategies.
Very nice. Abhijit, by the way, there are some Q&A questions. One of them is from Phil Gordon, which is really specific and technical. I think he's asking to meet with you. So I think you already have one value brought to you from doing this interview. So I would recommend that Phil, you reach out to us in 500 Startups or me, and we will connect you to Abhijit. Okay, so I think you mentioned that you bought one of your own startup. How do you quantify the value that you brought to Goodyear through that one acquisition? How do you measure it? Yeah,
so it is not typical for us to buy the startups. We recognize that sometimes, in most occasions, it is really the best outcome is to leave the startup's DNA to itself and let it mature on its own, and allow us to be a part of the ride and learn from them. In this specific instance, the strategic fit was so high that we determined that the startup would be better off inside Goodyear than as an independent company. So that's kind of why we made that strategic decision. And it was actually an electronics company that was really great in building sensing technologies, which was relevant for our core product. The way we justified the return on the investment and the strategic rationale of buying or making that acquisition was the level of intimacy it gave us with our customers, because now we are connecting with our customers not just by giving them a product or giving them a manual service. There was a lot of automated aspects of delivering that service to our customers. So it connected us to our big customers in a very meaningfully different way. And that's mainly how we justified that specific acquisition. But I want to specify, we typically, from the CVC, certainly, we don't typically look for acquisitions as an end goal. We look for the startup being successful on its own as an end goal, and we being an enabler of that success.
That's a perfect way to look at it. I have one more question from Randy Gustafson, which I think is really asking about the side benefit of a corporate VC. You see so many startups, some you will invest in, some you won't, but it could be beneficial for Goodyear, for the mothership. Can you talk about examples where you meet startups and you're like, you're not quite for our investment, but we want to engage with you and we will connect you with Goodyear?
Yeah, indeed. I'm trying to think of what would be a best case example. Yes, so we actually met a startup which was building a very unique and innovative platform on which you can actually build a lot of different types of electric and autonomous vehicles combined together. So this was actually, they typically fell within our world, a tier 1 type of a company to an original equipment supplier. So not very deeply connected with our thesis, but we realized that because of the way they were designing the chassis and the systems, that it would make it a very, very interesting candidate for us to bring in our product development engineers to work with that startup to examine if we could build a very different product that fit that application. So that was a case where we said, you know what, it doesn't fit our thesis, and we are likely not going to be an investor, but boy, I mean, we could learn so much by working with you strategically. And lo and behold, we have a memorandum of understanding with that startup to support it in product design. And again, to support it in the aftermarket with respect to solutions through and services through the Goodyear store. So those examples are in certain cases, the CVC does not hand off the relationship. We have tended to follow on and execute the MOU on behalf of the organization and then hand it off to our the concerned person with respect to the technology development work that will be doing that work. So those are terrific side benefits of having a CVC. Sometimes those benefits can overshadow the direct benefits of having the CVC itself, because these are such meaningful innovation that's happening that concerns our product, and we can make those connections happen even when there is not a direct investment possible because of a gap in the thesis.
Abhijit, I think it's a great way to finish this really nice interview and showing that you bring value to Goodyear even when you don't invest. Thank you for your time. It was really nice.
Thank you, Nicolas. And again, thank you everyone for having me.